Hey, good morning. Great to see you on this beautiful, nice, cool Sunday morning. Glad that you are here. I'm looking forward to today. We're kicking off a new study for the next 5 weeks through the letter that is named James. James, the brother of Jesus, who writes this letter. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But he writes this letter to a group of Christians, and we're going to delve into this for a few weeks. I'm really excited about this letter. We love to do this around here. We love to take a passage of Scripture or a book of the Bible and just kind of read through what it meant when it was written, who it was written to, why they received it, and then what does it mean for us today, all these years later. And James is a book that is so rich of so much very practical application of what it means to follow Jesus. In fact, I've had a couple people say to me, "Oh, James, great. It means you're going to be stepping on toes. For how long are you doing this, right?" I mean, it kind of does that a little bit, but it's going to be good, and I'm glad that you're here with us. In fact, let me encourage you, if you have a Bible, go ahead and open to the book of James, the letter of James. James chapter 1 is where we're going to be this morning. If you don't have a Bible, should be one under a seat nearby, the page number right there on the screen of the Bible there in the seats. You know, we've all had moments where we expected one thing but experienced something completely different, haven't we? I mean, there's a lot of moments. You could probably think of one or two or 50 of those that have happened in your life, right? You thought one thing was going to happen, something else actually happened. You thought it was going to be a really kind of peaceful, relaxing Christmas meal, maybe, a month back or so, and then somebody brings up, "So who are you voting for?" or something like that, and all of a sudden it got a little less peaceful around the house. I don't know, whatever it might be. I mean, a lot of times we expect something, and then we experience something completely different. We all know what that's like. A few months back, or several weeks back, I should say, one of our staff members here who oversees our facilities, his name's John, he was talking to a few of us around the office one day, and he said, "Hey, I want to ask your opinion about something." Like, all right. I've been looking for, and we need a new vacuum cleaner for, like in the auditorium. He's looking for one that's a backpack vacuum cleaner that's cordless, chargeable, makes it much easier cleaning this room, in between the rows and all that. Okay, great. He goes, "So I've been looking at them. They're a little pricey, but I found one that's almost half the price of any one I found anywhere else." All right, what's the problem with that? Sounds great to me, right? And he goes, "Well, the problem is it says it's going to ship from China." Okay, well, I mean, we get a lot of goods from China, so what's necessarily wrong with that? You're like, well, I mean, it's on eBay, and it's got, I'm looking at it, it seems all legit. It's even got the, eBay warranty guarantee. If it doesn't show up or it doesn't work as it was promised, refund your money. I was like, all right, well, I guess, it's kind of a no-lose deal. And so we talked about it, and he's like, all right, I'm going to do it. And he orders it. And then he's like, it's going to be 4 weeks before it gets here. Well, that's because it's coming from China, right? I guess literally. So anyway, he's waiting, and it's this big joke around the office. Is it actually going to show up or not? Or when it shows up, is it actually going to be a vacuum cleaner, or what's it going to be, and all this kind of stuff. And so one day I'm sitting at my desk in the office, and I hear the back door to the office open, and John comes down the hallway, and he pokes his head in. "Hey, I just got notification. It's here," right? And he heads up to the front where, most of the deliveries show up. And I overhear the conversation, and he's like, "Hey, so is my vacuum cleaner here?" And I hear one of the ladies up front say, "Well, something's here. I don't know if it's a vacuum cleaner or not." He's like, "What do you mean?" And so she hands him the package. "This is some more vacuum cleaner right here, buddy," right? He's like, "Really? What is this, like a hand vacuum? This is not even big enough to be a dust buster, right?" He's like, "What in the world is this?" And on the package, it actually says, right, from China. So it's come over, right, and it delivers, and he opens the package up, and this is what is inside. Gucci. It is a Gucci wallet. Not quite a vacuum. And so immediately, my sarcastic personality, because this is the 1st of December, I'm like, "So John, be honest. You've been Christmas shopping for your wife on the church credit card." "Oh, I ordered a vacuum cleaner," right? Yeah, right. Likely story. He's like, "No, man, I promise. Look, I got the receipt," all of that. So anyway, he emails the company, "Hey, I ordered a vacuum cleaner. You sent me a wallet. Oh, we apologize. Would you like us to send you another vacuum cleaner or just refund it?" And he's like, "No, let's go for a refund. How about that?" And so we did, got the refund back. And then he says, how would you like me to return this?" And so here's the conversation that had been going around as he opened this that day. Somebody goes, "So do you think it's authentic Gucci?" I'm going to go out on a limb. Say, probably not, right? And so he emails them, "How would you like us to return the wallet?" And they say, "Just keep it." So obviously it's real, right? Yeah, so Anyway, we did look it up, and this particular wallet starts at like $550. So we're gonna auction it off today, starting bid 400. 400, it's a steal at $400, man, all right? Anyway, sometimes what you expect and what you experience are two very different things. We've all gone through those moments. So this letter that James writes about talks about that, and he actually talks about it in a much deeper sense, because it's not just that sometimes we experience something different than we expect. Sometimes we actually even settle for less than what's possible. And really, that's the theme of James throughout this letter, that he's going to write to a group of Christians. Specifically, James is writing to a group of Jewish Christians, people just like James that grew up Jewish, grew up waiting for, praying for, anticipating the Messiah one day would show up and deliver them, although they thought he was going to deliver them from Rome, and Jesus had a little different plan. And James, again, the brother of Jesus, who early on in Jesus' ministry was not all that thrilled with what Jesus was saying. You know, when you read through the story, you realize sometimes his family was just a little bit nervous, like, Jesus, we love you, you're part of our family, but you've kind of gone off the deep end a little bit with what you're saying, you know? And then all of a sudden, they go from kind of their own skeptics about their brother and their family member to some of the most ardent proponents of the message of Jesus. And what changed? Very simply, Jesus said he would die, be buried, and 3 days later was raised, and he pulled it off. And the resurrection of Jesus from the grave changed everything they thought about who this guy actually was. And not only them, but everyone who followed them. And so James is writing to a group of Jewish Christians, but he's specifically writing to them because they are suffering tremendously for their faith. And as he's writing to them who are suffering for their faith in Christ, he wants them to remember something. He wants them to be very, very clear about something. This is what he wants them to be clear about, right? At the very beginning of the letter, he says it this way. Here's why he's writing. I want you to know that the testing of your faith, which that sounds really exciting, doesn't it? The testing of your faith. It's going to produce something. It's going to produce steadfastness. Steadfastness, another word for endurance, right? It's going to help you to hang in there and to not quit. The testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you would be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Here's the primary idea that James is going to talk about all 5 of these chapters as we walk through this for the next 5 weeks. That when it comes to those who follow Jesus, there are basically 2 types of Christians. And he's going to talk about them. He's going to address both of them in this letter and what differentiates one from the other. There's 2 types of Christians, basically. You could summarize it this way. The first are those who enjoy a faith in Jesus that has its full effect. Their faith has its full effect in their life. There's a fullness to faith. There's a fullness to life. They find themselves being complete and not really lacking, even when they don't have everything they might like or want. So there are Christians whose faith has its full effect. And then the second group are those who are Christians but settle for far less than this right here. They settle for far less than a fullness of their faith. They accept far less than the full effect of faith in their life, much less than anything God ever intended. He talks about there's this big difference, and he talks about it a lot of different ways as he walks through here. Those whose faith is causing this full effect of God in them, and others whose faith are settling for less than what God intends. And he centers the discussion around a word that, if we're honest, all of us are very familiar with this word. And the word he centers this discussion around is the word religion. The word religion. And when you think religion, that word right there has a lot of connotations to it. Some good, some not so good, some big, some a little smaller maybe. But in his context, in conversations, he basically defines religion. In fact, this is all religion means. Religion is very simply the beliefs and practices of faith. That's all religion is. What you believe, and then the practices you have as a result of what you believe, that's what religion is. And when it comes to 2 different types of religion that James is going to write about, he says when it comes to followers of Jesus, and he's not talking about different kinds of belief systems, he's talking to Christians. Followers of Jesus, you who are listening to these words, reading this letter that are followers of Christ, there are 2 different kinds of religious beliefs and practices that you have as Christians. There's 2 different kinds of Christian religion. And the way he defines them is this way, that there is religion that is pure and there is religion that is worthless. Which ought to be a little sobering, that he would say it is possible as a Christian to have a religion, a belief and practices of that belief that is worthless. But that's what he talks about. That one is pure, one is worthless. And he's not talking Islamic versus Christianity or Buddhism versus Scientology or anything like that. Again, he's talking to Christians, to followers of Jesus. Some of you have a religion that's pure and others a religion that's worthless. And the discussion about which your religion as a Christian is, whether it's pure or whether it's worthless, in the first chapter, the opening words of this letter, has everything to do with this one word right here, whether or not you have been deceived. 3 times in the first chapter, he talks about this word deceived. You think about this, though. Have you ever found yourself being deceived? You ever been deceived by something or someone? Ever ordered something online on Amazon, shows up and it's completely different than what you thought it was going to be, right? That's all happened to us. We've thought, again, as I said a moment ago, expected one thing and experienced something else. We've all been deceived by something. We've all been deceived by someone. We've all probably at one time or another believed a lie. Something we were convinced was true to find out only later it was not. This weekend, our daughter was home from college from South Florida for the weekend, and last night, we were sitting around watching some television, and this commercial comes on, and it's a guy who, claiming at least, he's a pastor, so he says, and he's selling something that he says is going to change your life. It is Miracle Spring Water. And if you will buy this Miracle Spring Water and drink it, all your debt will disappear. All your debt, all your financial debt will disappear, right? All you got to do is buy and drink this Miracle Spring Water. And here's what's crazy. He's got a commercial on television which tells me people are buying this Miracle Spring Water thinking their debt's going to go away, right? And I'm thinking when they do that, they kind of find out, maybe I wasn't quite being told the truth. In fact, if you believe that's going to happen, listen, let me save you the trouble. Don't buy Miracle Spring Water. I'll bottle you some Claremont chlorinated water from the sink in the office right over here. I'll sell it to you. Half of what he's charging, it'll probably have the exact same effect, right? However much debt you have today, tomorrow it's going to still be there, okay? So sometimes, for whatever reason, and as far-fetched as that sounds, who would believe that? The truth is, all of us have bought into something at one point or another that sounded really good that just wasn't true. We've been deceived by life. We've been deceived by people. But here's a bigger one. Have you ever realized that you had been deceived by yourself? That for whatever reason, you were actually kind of lying to yourself or deceiving yourself about something. And if that's ever happened to you and you've gotten to that point, it's a very, very difficult thing to accept, isn't it? I remember when I was in high school, I've told you before, I loved baseball, played baseball from the time I was little all through high school, coached baseball a lot of years. But one year in particular, I was playing for our high school team, went to Leesburg High School. And me and a really good friend of mine had grown up with, went to church with this guy's name was Billy. We were playing baseball together, and our coach had this policy that most coaches have, that during the school sports season, when that's going on, you're not allowed to play any other sport. Don't care what it is, right? When it's baseball season, and not only no other sport for the team, you're not playing any other sport for any other league. Like, you're focusing on this, don't want you getting hurt, out there playing a wiffle ball or something, right? And so, it's kind of a big deal. And so this particular year was not our best year as a team, and we're kind of looking forward to the season being over, that we could restart next year and all of that, right? So as we approached that last game, what we were really excited about is that we decided, the two of us, that we were going to join our church softball team. Our church in Leesburg was part of a church softball league. At that point, it was a really big league. There was, I think, 20 teams from different churches that were involved in the softball league, and some of the players had invited us to play. And so the first day after our baseball season ends, Billy and myself, we show up out there for a game. No practice, no nothing. We just show up out there because, after all, we've been playing baseball for months. And we walked out on the field, I kid you not, with this attitude: your saviors are here. You should be grateful that we are here. Finally, you guys, you're going to win this league this year. After all, we're like less than half the age of almost all of the rest of you that are playing, right? We are conditioned. We've been working at this for months. We play, we're competitive. We know what we're doing and all this. So we show up as arrogant as you would expect a 16 or 17-year-old to show up to play softball would be, right? And we absolutely were. And we show up that first game, and he puts us in the outfield, which is all right because outfield in softball gets a lot of action, except he put me in right field, which I really wasn't that thrilled about. I'm supposed to be playing infield because that's where I play in high school, I need to show you how it's done. What are you sticking me in the outfield for? And what was even more offensive is where he put us in the batting lineup. 9th and 10th. The last two, right? And we're like, don't you know who we are? And so we get up, right? And so here's the deal. You know what? The first 3 at-bats for both myself and Billy, you know what we did? We both did each time? struck out. Yes, we did. And you know why we struck out? Because the velocity of a softball is much slower than a baseball. Let me just say, all right? And your timing is off. And you want to talk about a humbling moment, right? I mean, swinging and missing a softball that's just like floating in the air like a balloon and you can't even hit it. I mean, it was pitiful. It was embarrassing. Meanwhile, this like 72-year-old retired high school teacher on our team went 4 for 4, short hopped the center field fence, right, while we're going 0 for 3. And finally, my fourth at bat, I get up and I hit the ball finally right off the end of the bat, right back to the pitcher as I'm running to first, who is taunting me. Like, hey, kid, why don't you run faster? Who's like 97 years old and he's taunting me. And so what do you think Billy and I did the next day? We did 2 hours of slow pitch softball batting practice. That's what we did, right? Because we had, can we just say, deceived ourselves about how good we were, right? We've all been deceived by people, by life. Sometimes we've even deceived ourselves. And when you read through James' letter, he really dials in on this phrase right here. Because in James, in his letter, he makes the case that one of the biggest causes of a worthless religion is that you were deceived. Deceived by what? Well, 3 times he uses this word in the first chapter. Here's the first time he uses it in verse 16. He says, do not be deceived. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. Do not be deceived. Don't let life deceive you about what is good, what is not good, where good comes from. Don't let life deceive you. He goes on a few verses later to say it this way, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. So sometimes life will deceive you, and then sometimes, just like Billy and I did a little bit that day back on the softball field, don't deceive yourselves. And then he says, if anyone does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. It's possible to be deceived by life. It's possible to deceive yourself. And it's even possible when you deceive yourself to deceive your own heart, which leads to a religion that is absolutely worthless. So here's what I want to do this morning. I want to start this discussion off in James' letter by talking about these 3 ways that James says we deceive ourselves that leads to a faith that is less than fully in effect, but that is actually in itself worthless. What does he say that revolves around? And here's the first one. He says, when we're deceived about good and evil, if we're not careful, you and I will allow ourselves to be deceived about what is good, about what is evil, about where what is good and where what is evil actually comes from. Here's what he says in verse 16. Again, do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every, and that word every pretty much includes every, right? Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. Everything that is good comes from God. This is James' first really big point, that if you miss this, you will easily and quickly and absolutely be deceived when it comes to your beliefs and the practices you have about the things you believe in regards to Jesus. He says, don't be deceived. Every single thing in your life that is good, it came from God. Every single thing. Now, most of every we can swallow. Like God gave us air to breathe. Yeah, I didn't create the air. God gave us plants to have for food, and yeah, we can get that. We didn't create plants. We might grow a garden. We might grow a crop, but we didn't create the seed or create the plant in the beginning. Yeah, I can get that. God created people and put into our life. Yeah, I can get that. But if we're honest, there's some things that are good in our life that we would kind of find it difficult to acknowledge that this came from God. I mean, I did that, didn't I? I mean, we've got a family that is solid and strong and spends a lot of time together and we get along really well. That's because of all the hard work that we've done trying to be good parents or good sons or daughters. Well, yeah, absolutely you've had an effect on that. No doubt, no question. But who gave you the ability to think of each other differently than a dog would think of another dog? Right? Who gave you the ability? Man, last night we were driving, went to visit my grandmother, 91 years old, fell and broke her hip right before Christmas, right? And so she's recovering, she's at home, and we went to visit her yesterday and had a great visit, just encouraging, laughing, joking around. On our way home, it was one of those beautiful sunset moments as we're driving down the road on our way home, and all of us are like, man, look at that is gorgeous. Who gave you the ability to enjoy that sunset different than a horse enjoys the sunset? Have you ever seen a horse just stop looking to the west like, wow? Like, that didn't come from you. That is a gift that God gave you to be able to recognize beauty. Everything that is good, everything that is perfect, it is a gift from God, right? I mean, that is what he says. Now, here's one of the most difficult things I've heard over the years. If you were to guess, let me say it this way. If you were to guess, what is the number one objection that most people have to following God, that they give as a reason they do not believe in God or don't follow God or don't trust or follow Jesus? One of the number one objections, if you had to guess, probably you would phrase it somewhere around these words. Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, right? You've heard that objection before. You may have even given that objection before. You might have that objection right now. If God's so good, why do bad things happen to such really, really good people that don't deserve it? I mean, goodness, the news last weekend, right, of the terrible, horrific helicopter crash. I mean, God, how can you be good in the midst of some really great people? Just something tragic happened like that. And then at the same time, why did so many really good things happen to some really horrible people? Like, if we're honest, there's probably some people that you would be perfectly fine with something really bad happening to them, wouldn't you? We were sitting at a football game last fall, and there was a lady sitting right in front of our family. It was a high school football game. And it was kind of quiet. It was, I don't know, a timeout on the field or something. And all of a sudden, this lady, she's looking up and she says, she's watching this other lady walk by and she says, I'd be really okay if she just spontaneously burst into flames. Wow. I don't know who you are, but make sure I never get on your bad list, lady. Like, that is intense, right? And you probably sit here and think, man, that's a horrible person. You feel that way about somebody, I know, or you maybe sort of do, maybe not that bad, but you sort of kind of do. Why do bad things happen to good people? Good things happen to bad people. It's the number one objection non-believers have about why they don't believe. But if we're honest, it's also one of the most difficult questions even seasoned followers of Jesus have in reconciling sometimes. Why does this take place? And you know why we have so much trouble with this question? Because we are really, really good at assigning blame. We always want somebody to blame that isn't us. We always do. You're late for work all the time. Why are you late for work? Because traffic's ridiculous on the turnpike, 408, 94. It's always ridiculous, right? You live in the state that is the number one move-to destination in the country right now. Exactly, that's the problem. Urban sprawl, that's why I'm late to work every day, right? No. Well, here's the thing. Even if that is the reason, most of us in here are part of that urban sprawl. So there you go. Wrestle with that for just a minute. Well, that got quiet, didn't it? Yeah. All right, but we're looking for something to blame, right? Why do you have credit card debt? I'll tell you why I have credit card debt. It's because the minimum wage isn't $15 an hour. That's why I have credit card debt. Right now, I make more than $15, but even so, I'd make more if it was $15. So it's minimum wage's fault why I have so much credit card debt. I don't know. Maybe it's just you spend too much money, right? Wow, that one's even more quiet than the first one. Must be stepping on some toes, paying off those Christmas credit card bills. Okay, all right. So here it is. You know who's really to blame? It's those Republicans. Or it's those Democrats. That's who's really to blame, right? I mean, the last 4 years, it's been the Republicans. The 8 years before that, it was the Democrats. The 8 years before that, it was the Republicans, right? It's always somebody to blame. And listen, while we're on that, can I just say this? I'm going to say it anyway, whether you want me to or not. But anyway, let me just say this. Before we start blaming everybody for what's wrong with everything, what if we just paused and recognized, you know what? We live in a place where we are more blessed than most people in the world think is even possible. And so before we assign blame, what if we paused and just were grateful? Amen. That God, every good and perfect gift in my life came from you. And yeah, there are things that could get better, and there's things we need to change, and there's things that we need to do different. But God, you have so incredibly blessed me in so many good ways. And rather than blame everybody and everything for what's gone wrong, let me stop and say thank you for the things that are going right. See, it's very easy to be deceived about good and evil. And James says, here's the thing. Every good gift comes from above. Now, here's the question. Why do bad things happen to good people? We wrestle with that. We want to understand, where does it come from? I mean, honestly, I've blamed, most of my pants are a little tighter right now than they have been previously in 2019. And I've blamed Chick-fil-A. It's whatever they put in that daggone breading that makes you go 4 times a week, right? It's their fault. They've made me an addict, right? I'm always looking for somebody to blame. Why do bad things happen to good people? Good things happen to bad people. Here's James' point. If you feel this way, when you're blaming God, our tendency when we ask this question is to respond like this. God, here's what I think. When it comes to what's good and evil, we tend to blame God for the bad and take credit for the good. When we can't reconcile good and evil and what's gone right and what's gone wrong, our tendency, all of us, is to say, God, here's what's wrong with my life. And you know who I blame for it? You. Because you could have stopped it, but you didn't. You could have given me something good, but you didn't. You allowed this bad to happen to me, so it's your fault, whatever's going wrong. And by the way, everything that's going right in my life, yeah, that's due to me. That is absolutely our tendency. Blame God for the bad, take credit for the good. And James says, when this is your belief, you're actually deceived because what is true is the exact opposite. Here's the way he says it in verse 13. He says, let no one say when he's tempted that I'm being tempted by God. God can't be tempted with evil, and he tempts no one with evil. When it comes to what's bad and evil, wrong with this world, none of that comes from God. He is not tempted himself by evil. He doesn't tempt you with evil. He's not sitting up in heaven going, man, how can I really mess with them today? What really bad evil can I throw their way today? And let's see if they trip up, and if they do, man, I'm going to smack them, right? That's not what God does. Here's what James says when it comes to evil. Each one of us is tempted when we're lured and enticed by our own desire. And when our own desire has been conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. See, our tendency is to blame God for the bad, take credit for the good. God, why did you not? How could you? All the while, I'm working to make my life as good as it can be, great as it can be, do everything you want me to do. It's your fault things go bad. It's my result when things go good. And James says, look, here's the deal. When things go bad, when evil happens, don't blame God for it. Because here's the truth. The truth of the matter is, you know where evil comes from? It's a result of sin. And you know who's responsible for sin? All of us. So cancer is a result of my sin? No, I didn't say that. I didn't say you sinned in a certain way and therefore God struck you down with cancer. But what the Bible does say, what James is saying, again, he's very practical, but he's full of some pretty deep theology. Here's what James does says. You know where things like that come from? You know where disease comes from? You know where suffering comes from? It comes from the fact that sin came into the world, and when sin entered the world, and we've all been guilty of it, sin gives birth to what? Evil, pain, suffering. When sin is fully grown, it gives birth and brings forth death. Death of a life, death of a soul, death of a relationship, death of a friendship, death of a dream, death of everything that's good. And so if we really want to be honest, the truth about good and evil is not that God's to blame for everything bad and we're to take credit for everything good. The truth, according to James, about good and evil is this, that we need to be willing to accept blame for the bad and give God the credit for what is good. And sometimes the bad we experience is not even the direct result of our bad. But man is to blame for sin. Man is the one who allowed sin into our lives and into the world, and the sin becomes fully grown and gives birth to death, the death of everything that's good. The truth about good and evil is that we are to blame, and God is the one to give credit for all that is good. That's the first thing that James says when you're deceived about this. You know what it'll lead to? It'll lead to a religion that actually is not pure, but it's worthless. And then there's something else that he talks about when it comes to being deceived. Another very common way Christians, followers of Christ, are deceived, and that's this. We're deceived about the goal of the law. The goal of the law. What law am I talking about? I'm talking about God's law. Every do and do not, be and be not in here. In particular in the Old Testament, right? The Mosaic Law, 613 commands that were given to the Jews about what it meant to follow Jesus. And we know the top 10, right? The 10 commandments was what we usually think about. But here's what James says in terms of the law. Because here's what I think happens. A lot of us, when it comes to faith, we believe faith is boiled down to the do's and don'ts. Here's one of the reasons why. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away filthiness and rampant wickedness. Be, put away, do not. Again, I think our tendency of a lot of us is to take salvation and take the message of Jesus and we boil it down to the do's and the don'ts, the be's and the be nots, to put this away and put on those things. That is the essence of religion. And yet when we approach our faith, we approach Jesus with that being the essence of religion, we miss the point. Because here's what he goes on to say. Put away those things, but instead receive with meekness the implanted word. What implanted word? The Bible? Yes, but it's more than that. The Gospel of John, you remember what it says about the Word? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Who's the Word in terms of the Scripture? The Word is Jesus himself. Receive with meekness the implanted Word. Receive with meekness Jesus, which is able to save your souls. Do you see the point of following Jesus isn't the do's and the don'ts, the be's and the be nots and the put aways and the put ons. The goal of following Jesus is the salvation of your souls, which then, yes, does lead to being a doer of the word and not a hearer only, because if you're only a doer and not a hearer, what are you actually doing to yourself? Deceiving yourself. And so the goal of the law is not the do's and the don'ts. It is actually who you are. It is the salvation of your soul. Now, here's what happens, I think. I think what happens is you receive Christ, you trust in Christ, you become a Christian and a follower of Jesus. And the longer you begin to follow Jesus, as I talked about last week, following Jesus means, yes, you're accepted just as you are. Nothing about you has to be different, but as you are accepted just the way that you are, what are we supposed to do to each other? We're supposed to push one another towards godliness. And so what happens as you follow Jesus is you begin to come face to face with what true holiness is versus what you thought it was. And true godliness, what it is versus what you thought it was. And over time, what you find out is that, you know what, I came to God knowing that, man, I want to go to heaven when I die. I don't want to go to the other place. I want to go to the good place, not the bad place, right? Not Jesus the way there. Okay, I'm going to believe in Jesus. And yet the longer you follow Jesus, what you realize is that however good you thought you were, you're not actually even that good. And however right you thought you were, you're not even quite that righteous. However godly, you're not even that godly. You begin to be presented with how unrighteous you actually are. You begin to be made aware of your sin and how damaging it is. In fact, the Apostle Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 5, Romans 5:20. You look it up later. You can write that down if you want. In Romans 5:20, here's what Paul says about this. The law was given, right? This right here, the law was given for this reason, so that your sin would actually increase. What? God gave us the law so that we would sin more? No, that's not what he means. What he means is the law was given so that sin would increase. The law was given so that you would understand just what sin actually is. That as you took your life and paralleled it against the Word of God, that you would realize how sinful you actually are, how fallen you actually are, how unrighteous you actually are, and how ungodly you actually are, that you would be really, really, really clear. The things you didn't even think were sin are actually sin. The law was given so that sin would increase. But then it says, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. Like one of God's desires is to make you and make me so fully aware of what is broken and wrong in us so that he can heal and restore and renew it. And when you're made aware of that, the longer you follow Jesus, you're going to become more and more aware of things that are wrong in you that you had no idea 5 years ago were even wrong at all. And when that happens, what James says, the point he's making is that when we're made aware of our sin, our tendency is to have one of two responses. We either respond by putting it away, or we respond by settling for a faith that's good enough. We're either going to put it away or we're going to settle. When God makes you aware of that, things in you that are broken, you're either going to say, you know what, God, yes, renew this in me. God, change this in me. God, shape and mold and forgive this and redeem this in me. You're going to say, God, how can I become more godly? You're going to put it away and you're going to follow him. Or you're going to say, you know what? I get what you're saying, but honestly, I'm good. I'm good with where I am. I've got a faith that's good enough. And James says, if you believe that lie, you've actually deceived yourself and you have a faith that's worthless if you're a hearer only and not a doer of the word. You've deceived yourself as a Christian. And your religion is worthless. And I think sometimes the reason we are willing to settle for what James says is a worthless religion is because we're deceived about something else that he talks about in this first chapter, and that is the true value of religion. And what true religion really is. We're just kind of deceived about what true religion actually is. He says it this way. First of all, remind us of this. This is what true religion is, right? What is religion? It is your beliefs and practices. It's not Islam. It's not Christianity. It's not Buddhism. It's not Scientology. That's not what James is talking about. He's talking about the religion of Christians, the beliefs and the practices of actual Christians, followers of Jesus. And here's what he says about this true religion. If anyone thinks he's religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Now, at first glance, you read this, and it seems to be saying that James says, here's the only thing that makes your religious worthless. You've got a big mouth, right? Like, you can't control your tongue. The things that come out of your mouth, you're always like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's actually not what makes religion worthless. So read in between the lines what he's saying. If anyone thinks he's religious, but actually is deceiving his heart, his religion is worthless. What makes religion worthless? A deceived heart. And what is one of the things that deceives our heart about religion that you can hear and not do? That you can settle for a faith that's good enough. He's like, no, you can't. That's not true religion. That's not true beliefs and practices. Settling for something less than the full effect of faith. And then he goes on to say this, here's religion that is pure and undefiled before God is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So pure religion, according to this, it says is what? To visit orphans and widows, right? So is that all? Can you read it? You're like, oh, wow, okay, I can do that, right? I visited my grandmother yesterday. She's been widowed for a while, right? So take care of those that don't have a father. That's all true religion is, right? Just caring for orphans and widows. That's where it stops. You read that, man, let's care for orphans and widows, and we don't have to care about anybody else in the world. That's actually a pretty freeing statement right there, isn't it? No, that's not what he's talking about. I mean, I think there's some literal command in here. Take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. Absolutely. And as a church, we take that seriously. But what is he really saying? Religion that's pure, religion that is undefiled. What's it about? It's about keeping yourself unstained from the world. It's about hearing and doing and not deceiving yourself. It's about responding to a God that saved you and allowing his salvation to take its full effect in you. Now, here's why I think this is such an important study for us. When I really think about it, I think Christians have this tendency to sometimes overcomplicate religion and sometimes not complicate it enough. Sometimes we make it way more complicated than it is. But sometimes, I think, at least when it comes to ourselves, we tend to almost be a little too simplistic about it, and we take all of our beliefs and all of our actions and all of our faith, and we really kind of boil faith down to three things: theology, morality, and eschatology. What does that mean? Theology, morality, eschatology. Theology, make sure you believe the right things, like you can check off, do you believe this about Jesus and this about God and this about heaven and this about hell? What about morality? And because of your beliefs about God, are you behaving the right way? You got the do's and don'ts, the B's and the be-nots. You got all that kind of figured out and you behaving correctly. And then most importantly, right, or Christian religion, what is it about? It's about where you go when you die. It's about making sure you're in the good place and not the bad place. And we take everything that Jesus said and everything that he taught, and we kind of boil it down to these three things: having the right theology, the right morality, and the right eschatology. I want to believe the right things about Jesus, act the right way, and make sure I'm going where I'm supposed to go when I die. Here's the deal. Here's what James is saying. Faith, true faith, is this, but it is so much more than just this. Faith having its full effect in your life is not just about heaven or hell one day when you quit breathing here, even though it most certainly is that. And it's not just about your behavior, even though, as we've seen, you can't be a hearer and a doer of the word and not a doer of the word and think that your religion is beneficial. And it's not just a checkbox of all the right beliefs. Faith in full effect is way, way more than that. What is it? What did he say in the very first verse? That your faith would leave you perfect and complete, not lacking in anything. And here's what I think James is getting at. I think this is what his entire letter is about. That a faith in Jesus that has its full effect in your life is a life that is complete. The reason you want faith to have its full effect and not settle for less than, but a full effect of his faith is so that your life would be complete. Complete here and now. And what I am most afraid of, if I'm honest with you as a pastor, it's been one of my deepest fears for a really long time, is that at the end of my tenure here, whenever that is, whatever year that is, whenever I retire and step away, that we would be a group of people that for whatever reason got very okay with settling for less than Jesus having his full effect in our life. That there's some sin we'd let him overcome in us, and there's some we just settle for and say, nah, that one's okay. That we would walk in godliness in this arena in our life, but over here we'd be willing to settle for a little less than right, holy, and good. That we'd be willing to settle. Because if you settle, here's what you don't have. You will not experience a life that's complete. And you actually have a religion that's worthless. And Jesus didn't die and raise back to life to bring us a worthless religion. He came to bring you a faith that is in full effect. And that's what I want to ask you to pursue with us over these next 5 weeks. And so I'm going to ask you to do something today. We're going to be in the book of James for 5 weeks, including today. And so I want to ask you to do this. There's 5 chapters in the book of James. I want to ask you to make a commitment, not for me, but for yourself, that over the next 5 weeks, you'd read through the book, this letter, James, every week for the next 5 weeks. There's 5 chapters, 1 chapter a day, Monday through Friday. All right, simple enough. Read through a chapter a day. You get through the entire letter in a week. Do it 5 times each week for the next 5 weeks. And here's what I don't anticipate will happen. I don't think you'll get to the end of that 5 weeks, have read through the letter of James 5 times, and all of a sudden you've got this perfect faith. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I do think is that maybe by immersing ourselves in the scriptures that long, that by the end of it, we'd be willing to let Jesus take us on a journey where we are no longer willing to settle for less than the fullness of the presence of God in our life. That's my hope for the next 5 weeks. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your word, these truths. Thank you for the fact that you inspired James to speak so directly about what pure religion is and what a worthless religion is. And God, my hope and prayer is that we would not be a group of people willing to settle, but we would be a group of people so moved by your presence in our life that we would allow our faith in Jesus to have its full effect. God, make us pure, make us complete, that we would be lacking in nothing when it comes to our faith with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.